Okay, so just to introduce myself, my name is Scott Hunter. I'm a program manager at Microsoft in the Azure team. And the areas that I work on are basically all of our server-side .NET technologies. So that's ASP.NET and all its variety flavors like MVC, Web API, SignalR. My group owns the Entity Framework as well. So pretty much all the server-side frameworks, even WCF. We do all the Visual Studio web tooling. So when you open up a HTML editor, a CSS editor, a JavaScript editor inside of Visual Studio, or an ASPX editor, our team builds that as well, and the publishing technologies. And we build the Azure SDKs along with NuGet. So those are the areas that we focus on. And today I'm here to talk about what we have coming in Visual Studio 2013, the next versions of ASP.NET, and Entity Framework a little bit. So to start, what I'd like to kind of start back with is what we just shipped, because we just shipped a bunch of stuff in September of last year with the Visual Studio 2012 release. And I'm just going to quickly go over those, then going to go over an update that we came out with just in February, and then I'm going to talk about what's coming out in the next couple of days. So in ASP.NET 4.5 in September, we focused on a variety of areas. One is, do people in the room know what NuGet is? Good. So we started using NuGet as our main technology for putting all the scripts and stuff in our projects so we can update those on a regular basis. We added a web optimization feature. Is anybody using that? A few people? So we added a web optimization feature in the release as well. The web optimization feature is all about if you're building an application, we don't want to send down a bunch of JavaScript files and a bunch of CSS files. And the technology that we put in basically takes your JavaScript files and your CSS files, minifies them, taking all the space out of them, compresses them, and then combines them into one file. So you get one JavaScript file and one CSS file versus a whole bunch. We actually used this technology on our own website, ASP.NET, about a year ago when we realized that the page speed was really, really bad. We were serving like 60 CSS and JavaScript files combined at one point. So something else that we did, and I'm going to highlight a little bit today in the talk, is we added async support to ASP.NET. You should be using async. There's a talk by Glenn Condron after this presentation today. Actually, he's going to do EF today. He has a talk on Friday on async. If you're using ASP.NET, you should be using async. And he's actually going to show in his talk even how async affects pages that don't use async. So he'll have one page that uses a database and one page that does not. And by enabling async, the page that does not even touch the database is twice as fast. We added HTML5 WebSocket support. There's a talk this week as well on SignalR. SignalR is our technology for using WebSockets. The benefit of using SignalR instead of using WebSockets directly is it actually works on platforms that don't support WebSockets. So if you use ASP.NET SignalR to do WebSocket programming, it'll work no matter if the browser or the server supports WebSockets. It basically falls down to different technologies. We added project templates that actually, as you resize the screen, would reflect the device. And I'm going to show some new technologies we're adding in vNext to make that even better. And we started up faster and had a smaller footprint. In MVC, we added support for mobile web pages. You could create a .mobile version of any page. So if you had like index.cshtml, you could create index.mobile.cshtml. And if we detect a mobile device, we would switch and use that. Web forms, we added a bunch of MVC features back to web forms. We added model binders and unrestricted JavaScript. Model binders is a way of not using a data source object, but instead of actually letting you write the database code yourself and some insert, update, and delete methods. And then we added a brand new framework called Web API. And this is kind of what, if you're going to build modern applications, I want to build a phone app, a tablet app, and I want to serve data from a server side, we would recommend Web API as the way to do that. Then we had a release that just came out in February. Well, actually, stop first. Visual Studio in that same time frame took a bunch of updates as well. One of those is, does anybody know what round tripping is? I think this is the feature that most people don't know that we did. This is also going to be in Visual Studio 2013. Round tripping allows you to open a project. Let's say you have a VS 2010 project. and you want to open it up in VS 2013, it will not break the project in VS 2010. So you can continue to open the project in, you could have one developer in VS 2010, one in VS 2012, and one in VS 2013, and you can open the same project. We don't break the project between the applications. We added a new feature called Page Inspector, and I'll show that today. Page Inspector is a tool for as you're developing a website. You can use it to find out where your markup is, and I'll show you can actually run your application in Page Inspector, and as you move your cursor across the screen, we'll open the source codes behind you, the source code file behind you. We added support for HTML5 in our HTML editor. We added a brand new CSS editor, a brand new JavaScript editor to take all the latest features. CSS3, all the latest JavaScript. If you're a web forms developer, we let you actually do all the support for opening control properties and stuff inside of actual source code files, ASPX files. And we added the ability to publish to Azure and TFS, from Azure and from TFS. And we added the ability to do something called database migrations, which I'll show in a demo as well. And then about that same time frame, we open sourced a bunch of our frameworks. So if you use MVC, you use Web API, Web Pages, Entity Framework, SignalR, NuGet. These are actually all open sourced. I've got the links to the sites where these are at. These sites are actually pretty cool. If you go to these sites, I'm having network problems, or I would actually show the sites. If you go to any of these sites, they actually have, you can grab all the source code if you want it, but the roadmaps are there as well. So if you want to see the roadmap of what's going to come up in the next version of EF, the next version of SignalR, the next version of NuGet, these are all accessible from these links. If I look at my team, we ship really, really often. We just shipped a release in September of 2012. That was the VS 2012 release. And then about 6 months later, February came along, and we released what we call 2012.2, and I'll highlight the features that are in that in a second. And now we're in June, and we're going to come out with kind of the next round of our stuff. So that's kind of my team's goal. Is the web is constantly changing the way you build apps. The libraries like Bootstrap and Angular, all these libraries come out all the time, and we want to make these things available to our customers as soon as possible. So to move forward to February of this year, we did another release. You would have got this if you're running VS 2012. It's got an auto-updating feature, and in February, I think it didn't come out actually until April, where the auto-update feature would actually bring this. But it was called Visual Studio Update 2, and it brought a ton of features as well. So for web forms, we added scaffolding. A preview of scaffolding came into that. It has a feature called Friendly URLs, and I'll demo that briefly today as well. Friendly URLs gets rid of the ASPX extension. It also adds the same mobile support we added to MVC to web forms. So you can basically create a default.mobile.aspx, and if it's a mobile device, we'll actually jump to that. In the MVC world, we added some new project templates. We added a single-page application template. A single-page app, if you don't know what that means, that's something like Twitter or Facebook. That's a page that appears to be, you always stay on the same page, but the screen is updating and stuff all the time. And the way we actually write this is we actually write this using Knockout.js on the client side, calling a web API on the back end. And you're going to see us do a lot of tooling in that area in the future. We also added a cool template for building Facebook applications. In Web API, which we had just shipped in September, we added a bunch of enhancements as well. We added OData support. So if you're using Web API and it's returning some data to you, now you can use OData to query and filter that data. So you might want to, if you're bringing a ton of data back, you might want to actually add paging. And you can actually, without actually adding any new API calls, just by returning an OData endpoint, you can use skip and take and all those kinds of operations on your data. We added tracing. I myself ran into this. I was trying to write a single-page app with Web API one day, and I couldn't figure out why my URL, my JavaScript wasn't calling the right URL. I wasn't getting any data back. And so now, with the tracing feature we added, as a call comes into Web API, we actually log how we route it, what controller we find, what action we find, and then actually all the data operations that occur inside of that, including if you're using something like EF, we'll actually show you the SQL that we run as part of that. So it's a pretty cool feature. We added a help page. I build my API, and I want to actually let somebody in my team try to use it. Well, they can go to the help page. It shows all the methods in my API, how to call them, and we even have a NuGet package you can add where you can add the capability of actually calling it from the help page as well. From the Visual Studio side, we continue to push on modern features. We added support for less. We added support for a bunch of Java syntax highlighting for CoffeeScript, Knockout, Mustache, Handlebars, JS Render, a ton of these things. We added support for mobile emulators. I'll highlight that a little bit in my talk. You can actually go to a page on our ASP.NET website and download emulators, and after you download these emulators, instead of running in a desktop browser, right from VS, you can run in a mobile emulator. One of the most awesome ways of using this is there's a library called, or a site called BrowserStack. And if you hook up BrowserStack as a mobile emulator, what it allows you to do, even on a machine that doesn't, for example, you want to see what does it look like on a Mac? You can actually see what your application would look like on a Mac, even though you're running on Windows. It basically calls a remote service and gives you that view. We added selective publish to our publishing, and I'll demo that today. And we added, if you're using websites instead of web applications, we added the same publishing capabilities we added in Visual Studio 2012 to that release. And that takes us forward to today. Got a bunch of new stuff that we're going to show, and I'm going to demo a whole bunch of this today. First off, the ASP.NET membership system has been something that's been around for a long, long time, and people have had various asks to us over the years. We created a hybrid system in the VS 2012 timeframe called Simple Membership, which was actually not simple. It was actually harder than the old membership. And we've kind of taken advice from people, and we've rewritten this from scratch. And so I'll show a little bit of it. I don't have internet connectivity from my machine, or do I now? Let me just check on this and see if it's actually, no. So I'll show how you can use some of this stuff, but this, it adds things like support for Facebook, Twitter, Google, Microsoft, all built in. It uses something called claims-based authentication instead of forms-based authentication. A claim is when you actually log into one of these things, they actually return a bucket of data to you, and we make that available to the application. And this is all built in. We've modified our templates to use Bootstrap.js. Has anybody heard of Bootstrap? A few people? For those of you that have not heard Bootstrap, I don't know about you, but I've realized that I cannot write CSS. And libraries like Bootstrap exist because a whole bunch of other folks on the internet have realized they can't write CSS either. And the idea behind Bootstrap is there's just some simple annotations you can put on your markup. And based on those annotations, it'll do a bunch of the things that a bunch of crazy CSS would have done in the past. Another cool aspect of our templates being built on Bootstrap is that means they're also responsive, which means as you resize the screen, they'll shrink to work on a mobile device. And they're also themable. One of the cool things about Bootstrap is if you actually write your application using Bootstrap attributes, you can then go to, there's sites that have thousands of Bootstrap templates. And I'll actually demo that. I'll drop a Bootstrap template into one of my applications, and it'll just change its look and feel immediately. And we actually have our design team at Microsoft is building a custom Bootstrap template just for our templates. I'm really proud of this next thing. This is called One ASP.NET. I'm going to demo this today as well. And if you've looked at our projects over the years, I don't know if you've counted, but if you actually install Visual Studio 2012 and try to create a new project, we offer you 19 different options. There's a whole bunch of options that show up in the dialog box. I'm going to demo this. If you select things like MVC3 or MVC4, those offer 8 or 9 more. And if you add the whole thing together, it's like more than 19 options. How can you choose that? Another point of this, so this dialog box means there's one project type. You create an ASP.NET project type. The next thing is we've added all these technologies over the year. We started off with web forms. We added MVC. We added Web API. We added SignalR. And a lot of our customers are confused that all these things actually work together. And so the new dialog will let you actually select each of the technologies you want. Maybe you want to start with web forms and you want to add a Web API. You can do that. You can now create an empty template with nothing in it and decide to add MVC later, or add Web API later, or add SignalR later. No longer do you have to be locked in and feel like if I don't make the right choice when I first create my project, I'm stuck. We have scaffolding in some of our technologies today. We have it in MVC. We have it in Web API. It now works across all of our frameworks, and I'm going to demo that as well. And we have awesome authentication. In the past, you choose one of our templates, and we just gave you authentication whether you asked or not. Now we actually let you choose none. You can choose to have what we kind of offer today, which is a SQL database that lets you log in. And we've actually now offered a bunch of really rich features for Azure or even on-premise Active Directory. So you can do Active Directory can be configured automatically. Azure Active Directory can be configured automatically. In the past, you'd have to actually go to the website, download like a 20-page white paper, and have your mind be blown away to even make this stuff work. For Azure, we added all the Azure, what we call fundamental tools directly, or foundation tools directly to Visual Studio. So without even installing the Azure SDK, I'll get access to things like websites, mobile services, virtual machines, just in the Server Explorer. And these are filterable by my subscription. If you're a Web API developer, we added support for cores. This is cross-domain calling. This allows you to call a Web API from a different domain and have it actually work correctly. Common feature we've had people ask us for years is something called attribute-based routing. ASP.NET's got this complicated routing system, or the developer that wrote it wouldn't say it's complicated, but I think it is. We create this route table. In attribute-based routing, you just add an attribute on your method, saying, here's the URL I want it to be called from, and we automatically configure the routing for you. If you're using Entity Framework, we added a ton of features. I only listed 3 here. We had support for async finally. We had support for stored procs if you're using EF code first. I'm going to demo both async and stored procs in this talk. And as we start trying to enable support for things like the cloud, we find that if you are talking to cloud services, there's a chance that those services the connection between you and that cloud service might go down occasionally. And so we added support so EF can automatically retry if it tries and gets a connection failure. In Visual Studio, as I said before, we had rewritten the CSS and JavaScript editors in the last release. Now we've rewritten the HTML editor. And I'm going to show some awesome features from that. We have probably the coolest feature I'm going to show today, which is called Live Browser Refresh. Changes the way that you actually develop when you're building a website. If you're in the room today, you probably write some code, you press Control F5, the browser launches, you check your website out, you close the browser, and then you write some more code, and you press Control F5 again. With Live Browser Refresh, and I'm going to demo this as well in a few minutes, what you do is you keep your browser open, you keep your VS open. As you modify your code, you press Save, and the browser just refreshes with the changes. If you have more than one browser loaded, you might have, if you have 2 monitors, you might load Chrome, Firefox, and IE up at the same time. Make a change, press Save. All 3 browsers refresh. It's pretty awesome. For JavaScript, we're continuing to add support for modern standards. We have support for Angular, JS, and IntelliSense. And in the JavaScript editor that we released in 2012, we had added a bunch of tooling to try to make the JavaScript editor have the same capabilities as C#. And we added the final piece that was missing there was a jump to function, and I'll show that. This is something that's available today. I'll demo this as well. If you're using Visual Studio and you do not have this installed, you should have this installed. This is basically a library written by one of the developers or one of the guys on my team, Mads Christensen. And what it basically is, it's a project that we have up on the VS Gallery that enables a bunch of the new technologies that we're going to show before we ship VS. It's kind of a test bed for editor features. It's got support for doing server-side or build time bundling. And it's got some awesome CSS, JavaScript, and HTML enhancements that I'm going to show. So let me move off slides. I like to get the slides out of the way and do some demos. So as I was saying before, I'm having a few technical difficulties up here. I cannot appear to get an IP address. Most of my demos don't depend on this. I will continue to try to make this work. But I have nothing there. Okay. So let's start off, and I'll do File New Project. This is VS 2013. And as I was saying before, there's only one project type. Now, that portable library thing is just a glitch that'll be out in the a later release of the previews. But you'll see there's just one ASP.NET project type now. There's not a ton of them anymore. And just to make sure everybody has context on this, this is what it looked like before. Yeah, you could choose one of these, and then maybe choose more of these. Or you could choose one of these. And if you chose the wrong one, for example, if I chose an empty template and then I wanted to add a web API to my project, I would get no tooling for web API because the tooling was based on which one you checked. Total failure. I don't know how we managed to pull that off over the last couple of years, but anyways, one project template. Inside of my project template, I've got a couple of options here. I can create a web form project, an MVC project, a web API project. But note that even if I click a web form project, that does not prevent me from clicking down here and saying, I want that to support MVC and web API. And the point we're trying to get across is it doesn't matter which project template you choose. You can use whatever technologies we have. They all play well with each other. Something else is we have this new authentication dialog box. So before, I'm not going to switch back to VS 2012. If you chose, if you're writing an MVC application, if you chose Internet, we gave you authentication for a SQL database. If you choose intranet, we gave you Windows Auth. You didn't know that unless you're like the product team. And so now this stuff is very, very center. I can say no auth. I want to have a database and have support for Twitter, Facebook, Google, Microsoft. I'm in an organization, and in my organization, I've got an Active Directory, and so I've got Active Directory support built in here. So right now, I'm showing the options that show up on the screen is I've got support for cloud, which means I'm using Windows Azure Active Directory. I've got cloud support with multiple organizations. That's a software as a service. That's where I want to go build a Yammer where I'm going to build my application, publish it somewhere, and let people log in with the credentials from their organization. So if I built an app with this, what happens is when a customer comes into the site, it has two options, log in or register your organization. If you register your organization, then people can log in with your domain into this application. And then finally is I'm running Active Directory on premise, and I want to be able to access the capabilities of Active Directory. If I create any of these Active Directory versions of the project templates, not only do we create the project template for you, but we also write some code showing you how you can actually call Active Directory to pull all of the fields from the directory for the user that's logged in. And so before, this actually would have required you to go out and download the WIF tools and read a white paper, just built in. So I think it's pretty awesome. So for fun here, I'll just create an app. Let me see what I hear. I have a web forms app with regular accounts. Let's just create this real quick. I really wish my network would come up. So I've got my app here, and I want to show a couple of features here. So I'm going to go and create a folder in my app. So I'll tell you a feature that's coming in a later release. Notice how big this menu is. This menu is going to shrink down a whole bunch in a later release. So I'm going to create a models folder here. And inside my models folder, I will add a class. Let's call the class person. And I always say when I do these talks, if you type prop and type tab, we do property expansion, which makes typing properties really easy. So I'll do a person ID. I'll create a couple fields here. Create a first name. you might notice that as I do this, another feature of VS 2013 is coming online, which is showing me live how many things reference each of these properties. And obviously, since nothing's using them right now, nothing is referencing them. So I'm going to scaffold it. I'm going to say scaffold column false. I don't want this to show up in my markup. I'll go add the data annotations to make that work. I'll build my application. And I'm going to show a new menu here. If I right-click on my project, there's now this add scaffold. And add scaffold is where all of the new scaffolding that we built in that works across all the projects exists. And so if you notice here, I'm in a web form application. I can still add an MVC area, an MVC controller. I can add what's called MVC5 dependencies. It's basically, if I select this, it'll just add to my project all the stuff required for MVC to run. I can add Web API if I want to. And we even can do, for the first time, if you're writing in web forms, we support the same things we've done in MVC for a while, which is I can create a data context, run. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go and build pages for inserting, updating, deleting person objects, and we'll actually add all the code to make the database work using EF code first. Now, if I run this, looks like a regular ASP.NET project here. It is using Bootstrap, and I'll get into that in a little bit. I can go to person. Add myself as a person in here. So I'm in the database. So even if you're web forms, you get the same stuff. Note that I'm in a web forms app. Note that I don't have any extensions. As I bounce around my application, there are no extensions. So it's using the friendly URL feature that I was talking about earlier. If you're using web forms, you now get all the benefits you got in MVC with no extensions. But what I really want to highlight here is I can go back over here. I can right-click. We'll go back to the scaffold dialog box. And I'm going to come down here and select, I want a Web API controller using Entity Framework. And I'll call it a person. Well, actually, let me do this correct. Let me add a folder here. I'll call it controllers. Now I'll add my API here. We'll call it a person controller. Select the person class. We've already got a data context. And I'll add this. So what this is going to do is take my web form application, add support for Web API to it, and give me those same CRUD operations in the controller. The only step I have to do to make this actually work, it can't modify any of my existing files. And so there's one thing I have to run here, is I have to run web API config.register. What will happen when we RTM this technology is we'll actually open a README file up that tells you what you have to do to make that work. So I still got to add this one line of code. We'll resolve the system HTTP namespace. It's going to complain I don't put semicolons in. So I'm running a web forms app here. All I've got to do now, reference API, reference person. What's going to happen is we're going to call web API, and it's going to call the get operation on that, and it's going to ask me to return the data. I'll say open, and you can see it returned my stuff. So any technology of ours, any application, you can now add the technologies using this technology. So I think it's pretty awesome that no longer are you stuck with what project type you created. You can create any project type. add whatever technologies you want, and it just works. While I'm here messing around, another feature that we added in the update in February, which you might not be aware of, is I can take that JSON that I just grabbed there, and I'll come down into my app here, move that stuff down, and I'll do paste special. There's this feature JSON as classes, and notice that I just wrote a class based on that JSON. So we have a feature where you can go out and find any JSON on the internet or from your own application, paste it back in, we'll give you a rich C# class automatically, which is pretty cool. Fix this back to where it was. Let's build. Okay, so I'm going to move on and show some crazy stuff that we've done in all of our technologies again. So I'm going to create another project here. I'll create an MVC project this time. I'll leave the authentication on by default. Let's create this. So what I was going to normally do in this demo at this point, if I had internet connectivity up here, is I was actually going to go create an application using Windows Azure Active Directory to show how easy that is. But I don't have internet connectivity, so I can't do that. But that configure authentication dialog, all it would have done is gone and got a single key from the Azure portal, pasted it in there, press save, and it would have created my application for me. So let's just kind of do the same thing here. I'm going to add a model real quick. I'll add that same person, and then we'll do some cool stuff with it to show some other new features we have here. So let me create a person object here. I'll need some data in a little bit. Okay, so I've got the same kind of boring project here. Build it. Let me make sure I built it right. And let's go add a scaffold to it as well. We'll add the same kind of scaffold. And we'll show some cool stuff here. Controllers, add scaffold. This time I'm going to select MVC, read-write actions. We'll add person again. Select person as our class. We'll create a new context. Sure. Go. So what I want to do is, once this comes up, it's going to go out and create those same views for me. I'm going to go to my view folder here and show some other cool stuff we've added. So if you've been using MVC over the years, one thing that's kind of interesting is if I'm inside of a page, a view, and I want to control F5 it, that never has worked before. We basically did not know what page that was. We now actually understand the routing table, and based on that, if you're in a view somewhere in MVC and you control F5, we'll actually run the view. You normally get a 404 and have to go and hand edit the URL. So we've actually fixed that. So what I want to do next, before I show the awesome live refresh, is I want to talk about async. So my project here is using Entity Framework 6, and because of that, it can support async. Now, in the preview that we just shipped, that we're going to ship this week, Visual Studio 2013, our scaffolding is kind of stupid. It still generates non-async code. But what we'll do before we actually RTM is we'll make it async. But I want to show how easy this is to make this whole thing async. So the benefit of making this async is any time your web application calls anything that takes longer than 100 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds, you should be using async. So if you're calling a web service, you're calling a database, you should be using async. What ASP.NET does when you do that is it takes the I/O operation, parks it somewhere, and then takes the thread that was running your UI and gives it to the next request. And then when that I/O operation is done, we wake back up and start over again and finish that request. Sounds small, but it can have a huge impact. When Glenn's talk on Friday, he's going to run a perf tool against a website and show in real time, doubling the throughput by making your methods async. So what does it take for me to do this? First off, can everybody see the font? Is the font big enough? Yes, no? No complaints, so I'm not going to change it. All I've got to do to make this async is change all my results to task of result. So I'll change this to be task of action result. I'll mark the method with async. This is using the await keyword that we added in 4.5. And then all I do is anywhere I call an operation, I now call await, and I'll call the async version of this. So let me go fix my using statement here. Build this to make sure it works. And so I'll show you how fast I can just change the whole file to be using async. So async, task, I now call await for my operation. I can type. And then I call find async. Basically, there's an async version of everything that I would want to call. There's no data operation in that one, so that one's free. Task. And so this is using the await keyword that we added in 4.50, which is amazing because it just makes calling thread code so easy. I'm not writing any callbacks or anything like that. And here I just say await, save changes, async. I've got like 2 more of these to do and I'm done. As I said, we'll actually scaffold these async for you in the future. We just didn't have time to do it in this preview. Change this to find async. Wait. Two more, and I'm done. But there's no programming voodoo here. This is all just pretty basic stuff. Let's build it, see if I messed any of them up. Looks like I'm good. Just to prove that it still works. I'll run it here. Person. And now all my database calls are async, and I'm getting all the benefits of these operations, running in background threads, and giving my application more scalability. So that's pretty cool. So the next thing is, I was talking about earlier, is I want to make my application work well in cloud scenarios. And as I said, in a cloud scenario, I might have resources that are behind a network connection. And they might go away or might temporarily have a problem with that connection. How do I make my application resilient to that stuff? And that's pretty easy to do now. So this is kind of another cool feature here, is I'm in my EF database context, and I want to add some configuration options to this. So I can create a class, myconfig, and it derives from DB configuration. just I can type right. I need to add a namespace for that. EF's got this cool feature where if you want to run EF config code, all you do is you derive from DB configuration, and whatever code you write in there will run by default. So I'll use another one of these snippets. I can type ctor, and it will write a constructor for me. And in the constructor, I can just write some code here. So I'm going to write add execution strategy. And inside of the execution strategy, I am going to call this, and we'll create a new SQL Azure execution strategy. Semicolon here. And resolve that. And fix my bug. And so a simple line of code added to my application, and now if my database goes away for a brief second or my internet connection to my database is cut for any reason, under the covers, what EF will do is it will actually retry that and keep retrying that with a strategy. This makes it cloud resistance, so you don't have to worry about that in your application. We take care of that for you automatically. The next thing that I think which is really cool is we added support for store procedures in code first. So I came from a world where I came from the oil industry before I joined Microsoft, and we were all store procedure based because that was our security model. And if you're using EF code first, we never have had support for store procedures. So it means if you're in that kind of world, you cannot use our product. We wanted to solve that. So we've added support for store procedures. And so all I've got to do is I overrode on model creating, and I'm going to add a line here that says, I'm going to take this model builder, and I'm going to say entities, and I'll do configure, and in the configure, I will create a C, which I'll pass to this, and I will enable c.map to store procedures. And what I basically told my system here is when it creates my model, I want it to map it to store procedures. Now, I've already run this application, so by making this change, I've changed the database. Those store procedures don't exist. So if I run my app and try to hit the app, it's going to fail. Because it's going to go, hey, the database does not match what you told me. So I'm going to highlight a feature that we added in the last release called migrations. So let me come here and let me turn on the console window here. So migrations is a technology we added for a while ago, and I'm going to highlight a new feature of it that allows you to keep your database in sync. So I'll say enable migrations on my application. When I do that, it's going to go create a folder in my app. So it's going to create a migrations folder in my app. What's kind of cool about that is in that folder, it's going to create a class that creates my database. So you can see it's creating my person table here with the 3 fields. Now, in our case, we added some stored procedures, or we said we want to use stored procedures. So if I say add migration, stored proc, I can name this whatever I want. What migrations is going to do is go look at my database and look at the difference between my model and my database. And we said we wanted support for stored procedures. And those don't exist in the database. So now what's cool here is adding that migration, it actually wrote the code to write the stored procedures. If you've ever written insert, update, and delete stored procedures, it's a pain in the butt. And this is pretty cool that here's the text from my stored procedure for insert, update, delete. So we're going to write the stored procedures for you. Using our migration feature, we'll write the stored procedures for you. I can tell the system here to update the database. When I do that, it's going to run those migrations. And this works in publishing as well. So if I was publishing this app somewhere, it will find the differences and update that. And now if I go look over in my Server Explorer, find my connection, drill in, go to stored procedures. I've got stored procedures. I run my application. I go to person. I'll add one of my favorite other Scots. Still works, calling through stored procedures, that easy. Take an application, use EF code first, map to stored procedures. Simple. Next thing I'll do is I want to show something else here. So this is kind of cool. So close down some of these files that I've opened up, and we'll start showing cool features like live refresh. So I've got my app here, and for fun, I'm going to drop down the browsers I can run. And first off, this came in the .2 release as well. We detect all the browsers you have installed and make them available. If I had internet connection, I would actually show this. If I hit more emulators, it'll go out to a page. It'll allow for me the choice of downloading Android emulators, Windows Phone emulators, Electric Plum has some iPad emulators, and I can install those and they'll show up here as a first-class citizen. I'm going to run Page Inspector just because I don't know how many folks have actually seen it. I'll run the app, and we'll give it a chance to get up here. And while my app's up, I'm going to go to like the contact page here. And I'm looking at this address, and I wonder where that markup is in my app. Well, I click Inspect. I move my mouse over that. We automatically open up in the editor exactly where that text is in your application, and you're ready to go. So I'm going to stop debugging for now and show Artery. Now, Artery is the code name for live refresh. And this is the technology I was saying before. It to me is the new kind of workflow that I expect people to do with Visual Studio. So to make this work really well, let me park this guy over here. And I'm going to launch the application in Internet Explorer. We'll stick that over here. And when I did that, now if I move my mouse over this icon, I get this link that says browser link when browser connected. So what we've actually done here, before I even show the feature, is we've used one of our own technologies, SignalR, to add a feature where the browser can talk to VS and VS can talk to the browser. The way we do that is when you're debugging, if I scroll down here, we stick some script into your application at the bottom of your page by default. And what that script does is that script creates a SignalR real-time connection between the browser and Visual Studio. I don't have access to the internet because of the technical difficulties I'm having here, so I can't demo. Close that window. I was going to show some videos, some YouTube videos of some of the crazy stuff we can do here, but I do want to show some of this. So let me add an H1 here. I am here. So I'm over here, and I'm just going to save. Crap. That was not what I wanted to do. I'm back to where I am. I'm going to save the file. And when I save the file, the browser just refreshed. Now, what's cool about that is that's kind of the new workflow as a developer. So let me add another browser here. Just to show that this does work with multiple browsers at the same time. So as I open this version of Chrome over here, if I go back to my Visual Studio and I hover over the icon here, it now shows that there's two browsers connected, both the Chrome and the IE. So even though I didn't even launch that from VS, we know they're both here. Save my file. All my browsers update. This is just the beginning. Is that cool? This is just the beginning of what we plan to do with this. And as I said, I don't have internet connectivity, so I can't show the demos of what I was going to. I have 2 YouTube videos that I was going to show. The stuff that we're going to do in the future, if you ever been in like Chrome and actually edited your application inside of the Chrome editing tools, the F12 tools, the developer tools, wouldn't it be great if you could save back to Visual Studio? With Artery, you'll be able to open the Chrome F12 tools as you're debugging your app, make a change, press save in Chrome, and we'll save it back to Visual Studio. Let's say I'm looking at this page right now, and I'm curious what pages in my application might make this up. There'll be a button you can press inside of IE or Chrome or whatever that'll show you a list of the files that make up the page. If you select a file, the file opens in Visual Studio. We have a website called the Web Developer Checklist, and this will be one of the coolest ones we're going to do. And the Web Developer Checklist has a bunch of common practices that you should be doing. It checks to make sure you've got a description, meta tags. It makes sure that your images are compressed the right way. It makes sure you're not missing some special things in your markup. You'll be able to launch the checklist inside the browser, and it'll show you what's wrong with your page. You can check the ones you want fixed, press save. We'll go fix them in VS. We have a connection between the browser and VS. So it's going to be awesome. And not only are we going to build a bunch of these cool extensions, but we're going to have an SDK available on how you can write your own extensions or your own JavaScript code in the browser that wants to talk to VS. So we think there's just a ton of really cool things that are going to come out of this. So let me close down the Chrome here. And I wanted to point out that when I look at this page is written with Bootstrap. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of things that are pretty cool in Bootstrap that you can do today. So let me point out why Bootstrap is kind of cool. If you looked at one of our project templates that we ship in VS 2012, we shipped about 1,500 lines of CSS. To make this app look pretty good, here's how much CSS I ship. 12, 15 lines. And that's because Bootstrap is doing all the layout for me. And if you just search for Bootstrap.js online, it'll take you to a bunch of cool resources. I've got a couple of samples here that I can actually update and show some stuff. In fact, we can probably mess around and even do this kind of thing. So I'll just erase this code here. I really recommend people going to their website and checking out what they've got here. I'm going to show a couple of examples of why Bootstrap is cool. So my first example here, I just want to have some left-aligned text, some center-aligned text, and some right-aligned text in my application, in my page, and make it dynamically work. In Bootstrap, that is as simple as just saying, creating a paragraph with text left, text center, or text right. Those attributes just make it work. Let me, I don't want to show all this other stuff right away, so let me just pop this out. And just by having those attributes, you can see I've got left-aligned text, center-aligned text, right-aligned text. Simple to do. Not that hard. I've got another example here of I want to create what's called a button group. I want to have 3 buttons next to each other. Looks very similar to what it would look like in iOS on an iOS type style device. Once again, I'm using Artery. Page just refreshes. I've got these cool left, middle, right buttons all aligned together. I'm just kind of showing you some of the things you can do without having to go and write a bunch of complicated CSS. This is a great example of something you can do. This is a drop-down list. So I'll add that. Let's refresh the browser. And now I've got an action button with a drop-down list. These are all complicated things that you would do. If you go to the Twitter Bootstrap site, there's pages of things that you can do. And that's why we built this in. All of our templates now use this, reduces the amount of CSS that we have, and instead of trying to figure out all the hard CSS to make this stuff work, you just add some simple attributes to your markup, and you get these cool effects. One of the coolest effects of this, and I got lucky because I actually saved a copy of this in a folder on my hard drive, not thinking that the internet was going to go down on me here. Let me find the TechEd file here. I have a Bootstrap theme that I grabbed off a Bootstrap site. The site that I grabbed this from is called bootswatch.com. If you go to bootswatch.com, they've got a ton of themes. I grabbed one just showing you that I can take my app that I've got running here, and all I'm going to do is open the Solution Explorer. Tell it to stop. I'll go into the Bootstrap file, and all I'm going to do is select it all and replace it with this file that I just copied from Bootswatch. And now suddenly, the site looks totally different. Different colors, different themes, different styles. I think another cool aspect of Bootstrap. And so highly recommend Bootstrap. All those things I just showed you all work. It's kind of the cool thing about it. Even these little icons next to the email things. If you look to these into my markup file here, those icons, there's a whole bunch of built-in icons, and you just add them to your application by putting an icon dash next to stuff. Tons of cool features, all enabled in our projects here. This kind of leads me to showing some of the markup stuff. As I said, we rewrote the HTML editor as part of this release. So we've been slowly going through and rewriting these editors. These editors have been they've been really old. Like the HTML editor, it's been around for like 10 years. And so using a bunch of old legacy gross code and stuff like that. So one of the things is if you're a frontline developer, you write client-side stuff, there's a popular library called AngularJS. We now support, as part of what we've done here, we've added support for all of their things here. So I can come here and type ng, and will bring me all of the AngularJS attributes. We are going to do the same thing for Bootstrap. So all those center left, center right, text center, text center, text left, text right, we'll build those in so you'll have the ability to get IntelliSense for all of Bootstrap right in Visual Studio. Now where things get really kind of cool here is, has anybody heard of sin coding? So sin coding is all about, I want to write some markup, but God, writing markup can be complicated. So what if I want to have a section tag? And then inside the section tag, I want to have some divs. And then inside the divs, I want to have some LIs. And maybe I want 5 LIs. And then inside of the of those, I'll just write some test. I'm actually having... So if you look at that, what I did there is I said section, and then I said inside of my section I want to have some divs, and for my divs I say inside of those I want to have some LIs, and then I say times 5, and I just press tab, and I get 5 LIs. So if you know some markup you want to build, it's pretty easy to build that markup. Now let's do something fun here. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, write the numbers here, 4, 5. I know that you've got markup somewhere like this in your code somewhere. You've got some LIs or you've got some elements, and you decide, hey, I want to move those around. Well, how do you move those around? I guess you do something like this and then paste them here. That's kind of hard. What if you just had your cursor inside of there, press the Alt key, and moved them up and down? See that? All you got to do in your markup, press the Alt key, and move the markup up and down. I can move 1 to the bottom, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I just reordered the list in about 3 seconds or 4 seconds. Alt, press up and down arrow keys. Is that cool? Let's say I want to highlight some text. Now Alt 1 and Alt 2 now have a meaning. So if I press Alt 1 here, it'll select the element. I press Alt 1 again, it selects the row. I press Alt 1 again, it selects the LIs. I press Alt 1 again, it selects the divs. Alt 1 again, it does the section. I can do Alt 2 to go the other direction. Now, why is this interesting? First off, maybe I want to change that div to a nav. So let's just show another editor feature here. I can just change that. We added this in 2012. You notice I changed the first tag. The bottom tag followed me as well. That's pretty cool. But the next thing is I want to have like I've got a problem here. My LIs need a UL around them. So how would I do that? Well, I can expand myself to that, and I can press Shift Alt W to add a new tag. I'll add a UL here. So all I did there was I selected a block element using that Alt 1 feature, and then I pressed Shift Alt W, which is our inserted tag, which inserted that tag. And then now I'm like, I really don't want this section anymore. Well, in the past, you'd have to go rip the section off the top and the bottom. Now there's a little helper that showed up here. I can press this, and it says remove and keep children. So I'll press that. Bam, that goes away. I've got my nav, my UL, and my LIs. This is just showing some of the features that we can start adding with the new extensibility with the editor. So one more thing to show here as well. I called this out in the slides earlier. I've got let me go to my scripts folder here. Bootstrap's got a JavaScript file as well. And then one of the things I was saying before is we have added features to the JavaScript editor where you can now easily find functions, just like you can in C#. I press the down arrow at the top, all the functions show up, I can nav around my JavaScript. Once again, I was trying to make each of the CSS JavaScript editors as rich as C#. Now I've got one more cool thing I want to show here. Let me go to my CSS file here. So I mentioned Web Essentials being kind of cool. So let me show Web Essentials being pretty cool here. So I've got a test file here again, somewhere over here. And I've got a style here. And I really recommend people install Web Essentials. I'm going to put a little chunk of CSS in here and show some of the Web Essentials features here. So, and this is stuff that will probably be in the editor in the future. So first off, there's a Web Essential feature showing up already. In my CSS file, you'll note that next to each of my colors, there is an icon showing the color. So after I install Web Essentials and I open my CSS file up, I'll see an icon next to all of my colors. So that's kind of an enhancement. But we could take it a lot further than that. In this markup that I added here, I'm looking at a font family here. If I hover over the font, we'll show you what the font will look like at various sizes. I've got a background URL here. It's got a URL reference to an actual image. What if I hover over the image? We can show the image. These are all editor features you expect that will move from Web Essentials into the actual main editor. Another cool feature of Web Essentials is if I move my mouse over an element, I move my mouse over the outline element. Notice that a bunch of icons showed up on the screen. Those show what browsers support that element. Not only do we show you what versions of what browsers support the element, but if you look, you might not be able to see that from far away. We're actually showing the version numbers of the browser under each of those elements. So as you move your cursor through your file, we'll show you what browsers support what elements, and we'll show you what versions are supported. We can even do things like, notice there's a squiggle on word wrap. Wonder why there's a squiggle on word wrap. I hover over it, and it says browser compatibility, add missing vendor-specific properties to word wrap. It's basically saying that to make that work, some vendors' browsers, i.e. in this particular case, need a little bit of help. Now what's cool is, just like I was showing before, I get a little drop down here. If I press the drop down, add missing vendor specifics, and it goes and adds the MS specific for that, and now I get no squiggles. So pretty cool. Installing Web Essentials gives you all these awesome features in the editor. I'll show a few more here. You can tell us what browsers you want to support. I can just check which of those browsers I want to support, and the help that it actually renders to you will be catered based on those items. We also support things like, let me just bring up the Web Essentials menu here again. I can remove duplicate properties. I can add missing standards properties. If we find those things are missing, we'll just add them for you automatically. We'll do all the vendor specifics for you, all in here. This goes even further. I can do things like, I can go to my file here. I could select Bootstrap and jQuery. I can right-click on here, go to Web Essentials, and I could create a JavaScript bundle file, test bundle. And it created a test bundle. If I load that up, it's basically what it will do is when I compile, is it will basically take those two files, put them together, and compress and minify them. The cool thing about this feature is it's actually a compile feature. So we have a runtime feature that does this, and we have a compile time feature that does this. So that's Web Essentials, which I think is pretty cool as well. So I'm missing a few demos because I'm not online. I was going to show the new Azure stuff that we have as well. We have features in Azure now where I can basically publish my application to Azure, and now it's running in Azure. How do I look at the logs and stuff like that? I can actually go to my Server Explorer, right-click and say, attach my logs. The logs start flowing in the output window in real time. So as I'm actually playing with my application in Azure and I have any errors, they'll show up. So I apologize for not being able to show the Azure Active Directory demo or being able to show the Azure demos that I had because of the technical difficulties I'm having here. But I think there's a lot of stuff here. I want to call out a couple of other talks. So there's a talk later today, Entity Framework 6 Database Access Anywhere, Easily. This is Glenn from my team. He's going to talk a whole bunch about all the new stuff coming in EF6. There's a talk called Microsoft ASP.NET SignalR. Pranav from my team is going to do some cool demos showing what SignalR can do. One of the demos is pretty cool. He wires a Connect device to his PC, and by moving his hand, his website changes. I'm going to be doing a talk on Friday on Web API, all the new features coming in Web API 2. Glenn's got another talk on how to build async applications. This one's on Friday. I highly recommend this. It's because it shows the perf differences you'll see by adding this await stuff to your application. Pranav's got a web deployment done right that'll show how to do web deployments. And we have a Windows Azure website talk as well. So we've got a couple more talks here today that are pretty cool. This is just the regular resources. If you know us, I highly recommend coming to www.asp.net/vnext. That's where all of our vNext stuff will be. And then obviously, I would appreciate if you would eval this session. I hope you guys learned some good stuff from this, and I hope you enjoy the next version of VS and the next versions of ASP.NET.